Hey guys, what's up? It's Merc here from Poolshed Games, and tonight is going to be another episode in the Commodore Rulebook discussion for Dystopian Wars 2.0. There's been a little gap between doing these, but I'm hoping to get Section B and C up this week, which B will be tonight, and C will be closer to the weekend. Saturday will hopefully be a recap of the game we played Friday, and maybe we'll add some more pictures of stuff to our Facebook and our Google+. That's the hope anyway. Now, moving right along, the Commodore Rulebook. Section B. Section B is actually pretty short. They go over just some really simple, basic things. And you know, it's all stuff that I think we knew in our heads from playing the game, but it's nice to see it clearly spelled out. It tells you what the order of play is. There's the game, then the game turn, and then the phases in the game turn. You have your anatomy of the game, which your pre-turn phase you activate, and then your end phase. It's all really pretty simple. In the pre-turn phase, you do things like playing your tactical action cards, and bringing on reserves or flanking forces. The reserves and the flanking forces is something different because they weren't in the last edition, and the tactical action cards are different because they have completely changed. You know what, maybe I'll take the time at the beginning of this video, I'll talk a little bit about what's changed with the tactical action cards, then we'll get back into Section B. If you guys have played the game, and you used the star cards, which were the ones for 1.0 and 1.1, they're the same as they were, it's the same concept as was in Uncharted Seas. But what it is you had a deck of cards, and you could either everybody use the same deck, or you could have a deck for each side if you're playing a multiplayer game. And you drew, I want to say 5 cards, it might have been 4, and you refreshed up to that hand limit at the beginning of every turn. And these cards were star cards, which went Squadron, Turn, Activation, and Response. And a Squadron card you played on a Squadron. A Turn card you played at the beginning of the turn. Activation card you played on an activation on something. And a Reaction card was you played it in response to something happening. Now, we have tactical action cards. 2 decks come in the Operation Shadowhunter starter box. And those 2 decks are, I want to say there's 32 cards. Don't quote me, but I think there's 32 cards. And there's a special card in each deck, which is the Operation Shadowhunter card. The way it works now is you create your very own 16-card deck at the beginning before the game starts. You get a 16-card deck that you put together yourself. Every card has a victory point cost and a condition. Some cards, like the Operation Shadowhunter card, can only be played if you have the battle groups out of that box set. Or, like Spartan has said on their website, when it comes down to like the release of their naval, ground, and air, the new battle group boxes, they'll let you use different tactical action cards. And they will be including tactical action cards with new models as they come out and new box sets. I feel it's kind of like they did with Dystopian Legions, where, if any of you are familiar with that, it's the 28mm version of Dystopian Wars. And every unit you bought brought a new card that you could switch one from the deck out with for. It was a neat concept, and it gave a little flair to each nation. Now, I said they all have a point cost value, a victory point cost value. And what that means is you draw so many at the beginning of the game, and that's all you get out of the 16 cards you put together. That's your hand. That's all the cards you get for the game. So you really want to, think about what you're going to put in your 16-card deck. And to play a card, once you play it, the rulebook tells you to do it 2 ways. One, you either award your opponent the victory points cost of the card to play it. or you subtract the amount of victory points the card is worth from your running total. So it's detrimental either way to balance out the boost the card gives you. It's an interesting mechanic. We haven't tried it here yet. I'm sure we will, but I don't know when. That's just what it is. You can cancel an opponent's tactical action card by playing a card or a combination of cards equal to or greater than the value of the card your opponent played. So it's a lot different than it used to be. It means people's tactical action card decks will be a lot more tuned to what they want compared to the old star decks. I think it'll be an interesting challenge. But now that I've kind of explained that, I'll go back to the section B of the rulebook, which it goes over the pre-turn phase, which you play your any tactical action card you want to play. Then you have your late arrivals phase, and that's where you bring on your flanking forces and your reserve forces. Now, something I've noticed in this book is they've added the operational and strategic advantage. And operational advantage is the player, you roll at the beginning of the game, and the player that gets highest has the operational advantage, while the player who got the second has the strategic advantage. And that dictates a bunch of things now, at least in the deployment and reinforcement phases. And what it says in the book is for your deployment, the person with, well, I just had it here. Alright, I lost it. I apologize. But it's usually the person who has operational advantage, which I really hope that's right, because if it's not, I'm going to look like a goof. Yeah, the player with operational advantage may decide which player must deploy a squadron from their strategic reserves first. So what that means is, if you have operational advantage and you feel it would be better for you to bring in a unit, you can do so. Or if you don't really care, or you want to see what your opponent's going to do, you can force them to bring theirs on first. Going from that, you go into the activation phase of the game, which is just what it says. You activate, you take turns going back and forth, each player activating one squadron at a time. You do your command section, your shooting, boarding, disorder. And those are all just like they used to be, with the exception of disorder. And I'm touching my face a lot. I just got out of the shower, got home from work, so didn't really dry my little amount of hair off as best as I could. I just wanted to hop out and get this on the way. But each of those, and then you have the end phase, which, just like in the old game, after everybody's gone, you go through, you check for if the victory conditions of the scenario have been met. You roll for damage repair to take critical effects off. You roll for persistent effects to take them off. And you restore order to ships. Disorder's gotten a little bit... Disorder has become more important in 2.0 than it ever was in 1.1. I found a lot of times playing 1.1, disorder didn't really matter because usually squadrons that ended up getting disordered had already done what they needed to do in the game anyway. Now, after it goes through the different phases of the game, it goes into something that I really don't think has changed at all, which is how you deal damage. It gives you the difference in an indiscriminate attack and a targeted attack. Indiscriminate attacks are anything that uses a template, concentrated bombing, collisions, basically artillery. So anything that's bombard fire, indirect fire, any of that is what they have deemed indiscriminate fire, and that does not get affected by shields. Targeted fire, however, does get affected by shields, and that's everything else. That's either not in that list or not described as indiscriminate fire. So that's pretty simple. That's really the only change there. There was no such thing, I don't think, as indiscriminate fire in 1.1. And then it goes into how to deal damage, which we all know. The DR, the damage rating of a ship you're shooting at, if you exceed that, you do a hull point of damage. If you exceed the critical rating, you do 2 hull points of damage, or whatever the new chart says, and you do a critical effect. And if you double that critical number, you do 2 criticals. If you triple it, you do 3, and I don't think you can quadruple it. You might be able to, but I've never had that happen. So they go into that a little bit. They talk about critical effects without suffering a critical hit. Things like piercing, I know for a fact, is a rule for models. That means if they do a point of damage, they do a critical effect, which means you roll on the chart, you re-roll. At least you used to. I don't. Actually, I didn't read anything about that. I'll have to double check. But what it means is you roll on the critical effect table. Whatever critical effect you get, you don't take the damage listed, but you suffer that critical effect. So say you get the weapons damage on that roll. Normally it would do 2 hull points. You're only going to do 1, but you have the ship's attack dice. So it's a nice thing. It's a nice feature. There's a blurb about support aircraft damage. They tell you to jump to the section about carriers and support aircraft to read up on that, and I haven't gotten to that section yet. And they talk about hull points and attack dice, which we all know what hull points and attack dice are if you've been playing the game. Nothing has significantly changed there. The only thing I wish they would have done, either with this rulebook or with Operation Shadowhunter, that they did with the old one, was they gave you a card critical table. Now, the critical table is page 90 of the Commodore Rulebook. That's kind of what it looks like. And the criticals have changed. Some of them a lot, some of them not so much, but there are changes to the critical effects. The last bit of Section B is disorder. This is a lot different, at least to me, than it used to be. It used to be if you just lost a model out of a squadron, or I think if you were boarded, you made a disorder test, and as long as you got 1, 4, 5, or 6, you're fine, you didn't care. And you rolled it on 3 dice, so it wasn't exactly super hard to achieve. Now, it happens if you lose a model in the squadron. If your Commodore's lost, every squadron in your army has to make this check. If a squadron's out of command coherency, if a specific scenario condition has been met, or if there's a model design rule in play. Now, what that means is there's a lot more chances for it to happen. Command coherency is all ships in a squadron have to be within inches of each other. You take it to disorder test on 3d6. You need a 4, 5, or 6. 6 are red exploding dice. If the squadron is reduced to, if you've lost half or more, you need 2 successes. If you're out of command, you need another success, and if the Commodore has died, you need another success. So theoretically, if you have a squadron that's half strength or less, out of command coherency, and has lost, and you've lost your Commodore and your fleet, you technically need 4 successes, which you can't do unless you roll exploding 6s. The Commodore's command radius is 8 inches. If the squadron is within that, they get an extra d6. And the list of things disordered squadrons can't do anymore has changed. I'm going to read those off to you guys because it's a bigger list than it used to be before. You can't perform any firing options. They can't play tactical action cards. they can't board. If it's a carrier, they can't perform carrier actions or launch drones. They cannot have a combat patrol attached, and they cannot disembark any embarked units upon them. So, in some instances, if you're going first, you might want to try to get disordered on some of the more heavy-hitting units in your opponent's army, just to kind of shut them down for a turn. Now, rallying from disorder is something they go over in Game Turn's End Phase on page 139, which is in Section C of the rules. But I'll just go over it here, and I'll go over it again when I get to Section C. Basically, what you do now is when it comes to that part of the turn, you roll a d3, and that is the total number of either assault points or hull points that squadron loses. It's up to the player to decide how they split them up, so it could be all hull points, all assault points, or a mix of both. But after that, they're automatically rallied. So it's kind of bad to have to come back from disordered. It's not super bad, but it's kind of a nuisance. Like I said, that's it for Section B. Really the biggest things that I saw different were the deployment things, namely because reserves and flanking forces didn't exist last edition, or if they did, they existed in campaign books that I never read. And the disorder has changed a bit, to a great deal. Critical hits have changed a little bit, but not a lot. Overall, I kind of don't understand why they didn't roll Section B into Section C. It's nice to have that stuff separate, but I think it could have all been rolled into one section, and it still would have been clear enough for everybody to understand. That's just my opinion. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the disordered changes. I think that's kind of neat. It makes morale play a bit more of a role. And I think the next game, the Lich Lord and I play at least, we are going to use advanced deploy, flanking, and reserves, just to kind of get an idea of how it works. But that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. I know I've enjoyed telling you about it. Next up is Section C, and I'm going to tell you, Section C is a big section, namely because that is the main nuts and bolts of the rules. And I'm probably going to take some notes, so I might be shuffling papers and note cards while I'm doing this. Next time around, if I am, I apologize if it distracts you or bothers you. But I want to give you guys the best opinion I can on it. And that's it. I'm going to go. Hopefully you guys liked the video. If you did, give us a thumbs up or a comment down in the description. And we'll see you next time here at Pullshit Games.